They called him a traitor, a monster, a man who sold his country for blood money. For 6 months, he sat in a concrete room buried beneath the city, shackled, watched, broken, and completely silent. He didn't deny the accusations. He didn't confess. He didn't beg. He simply refused to speak. Until the day she walked in. She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't a lawyer. She wasn't even supposed to matter. She was just the interpreter, brought in because he spoke a dialect no one else understood. The guards expected the same silence. Another wasted hour. Another report stamped uncooperative. But the moment the door closed, the man everyone feared lifted his eyes and spoke. "If I tell the truth," he said quietly, "will you survive knowing it?" In that moment, she didn't realize it yet, but history had just changed. Because loving him was forbidden, saving him was treason, and listening would cost her everything. The summons came on a Tuesday morning and signed and urgent. Gabriela Okonkwo had been in Seoul for 8 months, working contract translations for the Ministry of Justice, visa applications, legal depositions, the occasional corporate dispute. Nothing glamorous. Nothing dangerous. She was good at her job precisely because she understood that language wasn't just words. It was context, tone, the space between what was said and what was meant. She'd learned Korean out of necessity, then fascination. But her specialty was something rarer, minority dialects from regions most people had never heard of, linguistic pockets that existed in the margins of official maps. It was academic work mostly. Harmless. Until it wasn't. The car that picked her up was unmarked. The driver didn't speak. They drove for an hour outside the city, past checkpoints that didn't appear on any GPS, down roads that seemed to erase themselves behind them. Gabriela's phone had stopped working 20 minutes into the drive, no signal, no data, just a blank screen that might as well have been a mirror reflecting her own growing unease. When they finally stopped, she was led through a series of steel doors, each one heavier than the last. The facility had no name, no signage, no windows. Just fluorescent lights that hummed like trapped insects and the smell of bleach trying to cover something older, something that had seeped into the concrete itself. A woman in a gray suit was waiting for her in a windowless room that could have been an office or an interrogation chamber. The line between the two had been deliberately blurred. Ms. Okonkwo. The woman didn't offer her name. Didn't offer a handshake. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't aware I had a choice." The woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You were selected because of your linguistic expertise. We have a detainee who speaks a dialect our regular translators can't parse. We need you to interpret." "What kind of detainee?" "The kind you don't ask questions about." The woman slid a folder across the table. "You'll be translating interrogations. Your job is simple. Repeat exactly what he says. Nothing more. Nothing less. No commentary. No analysis. No personal opinions." Gabriela opened the folder. Inside was a single photograph, a man's face, partially obscured by shadow, eyes dark and unreadable. Below it, a code name, subject 19. No real name. No background. No context. What did he do? That's classified. Then how am I supposed to? Ms. Okonkwo. The woman's voice dropped, cold and final. You're not here to understand. You're here to translate. If you can't do that, we'll find someone who can. Gabriela stared at the photograph. There was something in the man's eyes, not defiance, not fear. Something quieter. Something that looked almost like patience. When do I start? Now. The detention block was deeper underground than Gabriela had imagined possible. The air grew colder with every level they descended, until her breath came out in faint clouds. The guards didn't speak to her, didn't look at her. They moved with the mechanical precision of men who had learned not to think about what they were guarding. The cell, if it could be called that, was at the end of a long corridor. Reinforced steel. Biometric locks. Cameras in every corner. A window of one-way glass that turned the occupant into a specimen under observation. Inside, a man sat perfectly still. Kong Sherwoo. She didn't know his name yet. Wouldn't know it for weeks. But she would never forget the first time she saw him. He was shackled to a chair bolted to the floor, wrists, ankles, waist. The kind of restraints used for people considered extraordinarily dangerous. But he didn't look dangerous. He looked composed. Like a man sitting in meditation rather than captivity. His hair was longer than in the photograph, falling just past his jaw. His clothes were plain gray, institutional, but he wore them with the kind of ease that suggested he'd once worn much finer things. And his eyes. He hadn't spoken in 187 days. But the moment she walked into the room, his eyes lifted. Not with surprise. Not with interest. With recognition. As if he'd been waiting for her specifically. Hey besties, welcome to Afro-Korean Love Stories. If you love slow burn forbidden love stories, hit that subscribe button and like this video because this one gets deep. The two guards flanking the door exchanged glances. One of them cleared his throat. Subject 19. You have a translator present. You will answer questions. Silence. The lead interrogator, a man with a face like carved granite, stepped forward. He spoke in clipped, formal Korean. State your full name. Silence. State your full name. Nothing. You've been detained under National Security Act provisions. Your cooperation will be noted in your file. Your refusal will also be noted. Kong Shi-woo didn't move. Didn't blink. His gaze remained fixed on Gabriella. The interrogator's jaw tightened. Subject 19, you are required to. He won't answer you. Everyone turned to look at Gabriella. She hadn't meant to speak. Hadn't meant to break protocol on her first day. But something in the man's stillness told her the truth. He wasn't refusing to speak out of stubbornness. He was choosing his audience. The interrogator's eyes narrowed. Excuse me. He's waiting, Gabriella said quietly. For something. Or someone. Ms. Okonkwo, your job is to translate, not to. Then let me try. The room went silent. The interrogator looked ready to object, but something in Gabriella's tone, or perhaps the fact that they'd exhausted every other option, made him hesitate. He stepped back. Gabriella moved closer to the chair. Close enough to see the faint scars on Kong Shi-woo's hands. Close enough to notice the way his breathing never changed, even under scrutiny. Close enough to feel the weight of his attention, sharp and assessing. She spoke in Korean first, standard dialect. My name is Gabriella. I'm here to interpret for you. No response. She switched to the regional dialect they'd hired her for, a variation spoken in coastal villages, mixed with older Chinese influences and trader pidgins that had evolved over centuries of port exchanges. Can you understand me? His eyes flickered. Just barely. But it was enough. Then he spoke. His voice was low, careful, each word precisely placed. The dialect was correct, but there was something beneath it, an accent that didn't quite fit, a layering of influences that suggested he'd learned this language the way she had, not from birth, but from necessity. If I tell the truth, he said quietly, will you survive knowing it? The guard stiffened. The interrogator leaned forward. What did he say? But Gabriella didn't answer immediately, because in that moment, she understood something the others didn't. He wasn't asking a rhetorical question. He was asking her. Translate, the interrogator snapped. Gabriella swallowed. He asked if telling the truth would put me in danger. That's not a question. That's a threat. No. She kept her eyes on Kong Shi-woo. It's a warning. The interrogator's hand moved toward his radio. We're done here. Take him back to... Wait. Gabriella turned to the man in the chair. She spoke again in the coastal dialect, softer this time. Why won't you speak to them? Kong Shi-woo studied her for a long moment. Then, almost imperceptibly, he smiled. Not with joy. With something sadder. Because they already know what they want me to say, he replied. And truth has never been part of the script. They pulled her out of the room 30 seconds later. The interrogator was furious. You were told to translate, not to have a conversation. He answered, Gabriella said, her pulse still racing. He spoke. That's what you wanted, isn't it? What we want is cooperation. Not riddles. Then maybe you're asking the wrong questions. The man's expression darkened. You're here on a temporary contract, Ms. Okonkwo. That status can change very quickly. Do you understand? She understood perfectly. She was foreign. Expendable. One wrong move and she'd be on a plane back to Lagos with a black mark on her record that would follow her for the rest of her career. But she also understood something else. For 6 months, Kang Sherwoo had refused to speak to anyone. And in less than 5 minutes, he'd spoken to her. Not because she was special. Because she'd listened. They brought her back 3 days later. No explanation. No briefing. Just the same unmarked car, the same silent driver, the same descent into the facility that felt less like a building and more like a mouth swallowing her whole. This time, the interrogation room was different. Smaller. No guards inside, just the two of them, Gabriella and the man the world called Subject 19, but who had introduced himself, in his own way, as someone who understood the cost of truth. Kang Sherwoo sat in the same chair, in the same restraints, but something about him had shifted. He looked tired. Not broken, never broken, but like a man carrying a weight that had finally become visible. Gabriella sat down across from him. The table between them was bolted to the floor. The camera in the corner blinked red. "They're watching," she said softly. "They always are." His voice was clearer today. Stronger. The dialect still careful, but less guarded. "Why did you speak to me?" Gabriella asked. "Because you asked the right question." Which was, "Why?" She frowned. "Everyone asks why." "No." Kang Sherwoo shook his head slowly. "Everyone asks what. What did you do? What can you tell us? What will make this easier? But you asked why I wouldn't speak. That's different." "How?" "Because it means you think I have a reason. Not just defiance. Not just guilt." He paused. "It means you think I'm still human." The words hung in the air between them. Gabriella felt something tighten in her chest. "Are you?" He smiled again, that same sad curve of his mouth. "The state would prefer I wasn't. The state isn't in this room. Isn't it?" He glanced at the camera. "Then ignore it. Talk to me." "Why should I?" "Because you're tired of silence." Gabriella leaned forward. "Because 6 months is a long time to carry something alone. And because," she hesitated, then said it anyway, "because I think you want someone to know the truth before it's too late." Kang Sherwoo studied her for a long time. Long enough that she wondered if she'd made a mistake. Long enough that she started to pull back. Then he spoke. "Do you know why they call me a traitor?" "No." "Because I refused to kill someone who didn't deserve to die." Gabriella's breath caught. "They told me it was necessary," Kang Sherwoo continued. His voice was calm, almost detached, as if he were describing something that had happened to someone else. A political rival. A journalist who had learned too much. "They said it was for the security of the nation. For stability. For the greater good." "Who told you this?" "People whose names you'll never hear. People who make decisions in rooms without windows and enforce them in places without names." He paused. "People who are very good at making monsters out of men who refuse to become monsters." "So you said no?" "I said no. And they arrested you." "No." Kang Sherwoo's eyes darkened. "They erased me." Gabriella felt the temperature in the room drop. "What do you mean?" "I mean I don't exist anymore. Not officially. There's no trial coming. No charges filed. No legal process. I'm a non-person in a non-place, waiting for a non-execution that will happen quietly, efficiently, and without record. That's not possible. There are laws. Laws are for people who matter." His voice was gentle, but the truth in it was brutal. "I stopped mattering the moment I became inconvenient." Gabriella's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the table. "Then why tell me? Why risk?" "Because someone should know." Kang Sherwoo leaned forward as far as his restraints would allow. "Because when I'm gone, the story they'll tell about me will be a lie. And I've spent my whole life moving in shadows, but I won't die as a ghost." From that moment on, he never spoke unless she was in the room. "I'm just a translator," Gabriella whispered. "I can't. You can listen. That's more than anyone else has done." The weight of his words settled over her like snow. Quiet. Cold. Suffocating. She should have stood up. Should have walked out. Should have reported everything he'd said and let the system handle it. But she didn't. Because for the first time in 6 months, Kang Sherwoo had spoken. And she was the only one who'd heard him. The interrogations continued. Once a week, then twice, then almost daily. The pattern was always the same: armed guards, formal questions, Kang Shirwoo's silence. Then the guards would leave just for a moment, just long enough, and he would speak. Only to her. At first, Gabriella translated everything faithfully. Every word, every pause, every inflection. But slowly, she began to notice something strange. The questions the interrogators asked didn't match the answers Kang Shirwoo gave. They'd ask about criminal operations. He'd talk about logistics networks. They'd ask about assassinations. He'd describe preventing a bombing. They'd ask about betrayal. He'd speak about loyalty to people who no longer existed. And every time she translated, she could feel the gap widening between what was being said and what was being heard. One day, after a particularly tense session, Kang Shirwoo corrected her. It was subtle. So subtle she almost missed it. She'd translated a phrase as "I worked with them," but he'd actually said "I worked for them." A single word. A world of difference. When the guards left, she turned to him. "You speak Korean. Fluent Korean. Not just the dialect." "Yes." "Then why?" "Because the dialect forces them to rely on you. And you." He tilted his head slightly. "You're still deciding whether to believe me." "I'm not supposed to believe anything. I'm supposed to translate." "Then why did you change my words yesterday?" Gabriella froze. "You softened what I said," Kang Shirwoo continued calmly. "When I described the operation they wanted me to lead. You translated it as morally questionable instead of mass murder." "I don't apologize. You did it because you understood what would happen if you translated it accurately. They would have ended the session. Possibly ended me." "How do you know that?" "Because I've been playing this game longer than you've been alive." His eyes were kind, despite the harshness of his words. "You're trying to protect me. I appreciate that. But you need to understand something." "What?" "The moment you started changing my words, you stopped being neutral. And in a place like this, neutrality is the only thing keeping you safe." Gabriella felt her throat tighten. "Then what am I supposed to do?" "Survive," Kang Shirwoo said simply. "And when I'm gone, remember what I told you. That's all I ask." "You talk like you're already dead." "I've been dead since the moment I refused to pull the trigger." He said it without bitterness. Without fear. Just fact. Now I'm just waiting for my body to catch up. But Gabriella couldn't let it go. Late at night, in her small apartment in Seoul, she started searching. Carefully. Using VPNs and proxy servers and every trick she'd learned from journalist friends back home. She wasn't looking for proof. She didn't even know what proof would look like. She was looking for inconsistencies. And she found them. News articles about a political assassination that had been prevented by intelligence services. Reports of a covert operation that had saved hundreds of lives. Buried deep in archived press releases, a single line: "One suspect remains in custody." No name. No photo. No follow-up. But the dates matched. The timeline matched. And slowly, sickeningly, Gabriella began to understand. Kang Shirwoo had been telling the truth. He hadn't betrayed his country. He'd saved it. And they were going to kill him for it. The next time she saw him, she couldn't hide what she'd learned. The moment the guards left the room, she leaned across the table. "I found the articles. About the operation. About what you stopped." Kang Shirwoo's expression didn't change. And you were right. You saved lives. Hundreds of them. Maybe more." "Yes." "Then why?" Her voice cracked. "Why are you still here?" "Because the operation I stopped wasn't just criminal. It was official. Sanctioned. Planned by people who believed the ends justified the means." He paused. "I made them look weak. Worse, I made them look wrong. That's unforgivable. So they erased you." "They tried." A ghost of a smile. "But here you are." Gabriella shook her head. "I'm nobody. A contractor. What can I possibly?" "You can remember," Kang Shirwoo said quietly. "When they write the history, you can know it's a lie. That's not nothing. It's not enough. It's all I have to give." They sat in silence for a long moment. The camera watched. The walls pressed in. And Gabriella realized something that made her stomach drop. She didn't want him to die. Not because he was innocent, though he was. Not because he was right, though he was. But because somewhere in these cold rooms, in these stolen moments of truth, she'd started to see him. Not as Subject 19. Not as a criminal or a traitor or a ghost. As a man. A man who'd chosen principle over survival. A man who spoke of death with the same calm he'd probably once used to negotiate shipping routes and financial transfers. A man who was willing to be forgotten as long as someone, somewhere, knew the truth. And that terrified her. Because the rules were clear. She was government personnel. He was a state prisoner. Any emotional attachment was treason. Helping him was career destruction. And loving him. She couldn't even finish the thought. 2 weeks later, everything changed. Gabriella was called into a debriefing with the woman in the gray suit. The same one who'd recruited her. The same one who'd told her to translate without opinion. "We're pleased with your work, Ms. Okonkwo." Gabriella sat very still. "Thank you. Subject 19 has been more cooperative with you present. The committee has noticed. I'm just doing my job." "Yes. Well." The woman opened a folder. "We'd like to extend your contract. Another 6 months. Possibly longer." Gabriella's pulse quickened. "Why?" "Because we're entering the final phase of the case. Subject 19 will be transferred to a higher security facility. Eventually, there will be a resolution." The woman's eyes were cold. "We need consistency in translation during this transition." A resolution. Gabriella's mouth was dry. "What kind of resolution?" "The kind that's above your clearance level." The woman smiled without warmth. "Do you accept the extension?" Gabriella should have said no. Should have walked away. Should have protected herself. Instead, she heard herself say, yes. Because 6 more months meant 6 more months he'd be alive. And she wasn't ready to let him go. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation. Every glance. Every moment of silence that had meant more than words. She'd crossed a line. She knew it. The worst part was, she didn't regret it. When she finally drifted off, she dreamed of concrete rooms and cameras that never blinked and a man in chains who spoke truths no one wanted to hear. And when she woke, she knew. She wasn't just translating anymore. She was choosing a side. Pause for a second, comment below. Do you think he's guilty or being framed? The facility descended into routine. Gabriella showed up 3 times a week now. Sometimes more. The guards knew her face. Stopped checking her credentials as thoroughly. Started treating her less like a visitor and more like part of the machinery. She hated how easily she'd become complicit. But Kong Shiru noticed everything. "You're tired," he said one afternoon. The guards had just left. They had maybe 3 minutes alone. "I'm fine." "You're a terrible liar." Despite everything, Gabriella almost smiled. "And you're an expert?" "I've spent 20 years building empires on information no one else could access." "Yes, I'm an expert." He leaned back as far as his restraints allowed. "You're not sleeping. You're researching. And you're scared." "I'm not." "You should be." His voice was firm but not unkind. "Whatever you're doing, stop. They're watching you too." "How do you know?" "Because if I were them, I'd be watching the translator who's the only reason their prisoner talks." He held her gaze. "Gabriella, please, stop trying to save me." "I'm not trying to." "Yes, you are." Kong Shiru's voice dropped. "And it's going to get you killed." "I don't care." The words came out before she could stop them. The silence that followed was deafening. Kong Shiru stared at her. Really looked at her. And for the first time since they'd met, she saw something crack in his composure. "You should," he said quietly. "Why?" "Because I'm not worth it." "That's not true." "I've done terrible things, Gabriella. Things you don't know about. Things I'll never tell you." His hands flexed against the restraints. "I'm not innocent. I'm just less guilty than they want me to be. You saved lives. And I've taken them too." The confession hung between them. Gabriella's chest tightened. Who? People who threatened what I'd built. People who got too close. People who, he stopped. Closed his eyes. "I'm not a good man. I never pretended to be. But you're not the monster they're making you. Does it matter?" Kong Shiwu opened his eyes. They were hollow. Haunted. In 3 months, maybe 6, they'll execute me. The truth won't matter. The lives I saved won't matter. All that will matter is the story they choose to tell. Then we change the story. There is no we. His voice was sharp now. Desperate. There's you alive, free, with a future. And there's me, a ghost waiting to disappear. Don't tie yourself to a corpse. Gabriella stood abruptly. The chair scraped against concrete. You're not dead yet. I might as well be. No. She leaned across the table. Close enough to see the silver threading through his dark hair. Close enough to see the exhaustion carved into his face. Close enough to whisper, you're alive. Right here. Right now. And as long as you're alive, the truth is alive too. Kong Shiwu stared at her. And for just a moment, she saw something in his eyes that looked almost like hope. Then the door opened. The guards returned. And the walls came back up. She realized the most dangerous lies weren't spoken. They were approved. It happened gradually, then all at once. Gabriella started noticing patterns in the interrogations. The same questions repeated in slightly different phrasings. The same topics circled back to, probed from different angles. But never did they ask Kang Shiwu about the operation he'd refused to complete. Never about the journalist he'd been ordered to kill. Never about the officials who'd given the order. It was as if that entire part of his story had been redacted from reality. One day, she found a discrepancy in her own translations. She kept meticulous records, always had. Notes on dialect variations, contextual meanings, cultural nuances. It was professional habit, but also self-protection. If anyone ever questioned her accuracy, she had receipts. But when she reviewed her notes from 2 months ago, something was wrong. A passage she'd translated Kong Shiwu describing a meeting with government officials had been altered in the official record. Not by her. By someone with access to the system. The change was subtle. Where she'd written, they ordered me to eliminate a target, the official record said, he volunteered to eliminate a target. One word. Changed everything. Gabriella sat in her apartment with her laptop open, hands shaking. They were rewriting his testimony. And they were using her translations to do it. The next session, she tested him. She asked a question the interrogators had already asked, but phrased it differently. Kong Shiwu caught on immediately. His answer was slightly different, same facts, different emphasis. When she translated, she noted the variance carefully. Sure enough, 3 days later, when she checked the official record, her translation had been altered again. They were building a false narrative. And she was the unwitting architect. That night, she made a decision that would change everything. She started keeping 2 sets of notes. One official. One hidden. The hidden ones, the real ones, she kept encrypted on a thumb drive she wore on a chain around her neck, tucked beneath her shirt where no one could see it. It was the most dangerous thing she'd ever done. It was also the only thing that felt right. Kong Shiwu knew something had changed. You're different, he said one afternoon. I'm tired. No. You're angry. He studied her face. What happened? Gabriella glanced at the camera. Chose her words carefully. I've been reviewing my work. Making sure my translations are accurate. His eyes sharpened. And I'm very good at my job. A pause. Then, very quietly, be careful. I am. Gabriella. They're rewriting what you told me. She said it quickly, in the dialect, knowing the microphones wouldn't pick up the nuance. Changing your words. Making you guilty. Kong Shiwu's jaw tightened. I know. You know? I've always known. This was never about truth. It's about control. He leaned forward. Which is why you need to stop. Whatever you're doing, documenting, recording, preserving, stop. They will find out. And when they do... They already killed you, Gabriella interrupted. They're just taking their time about it. So forgive me if I don't care about following their rules. I don't want you to die for me. I'm not dying for you. Her voice was steady. I'm living for the truth. There's a difference. Kong Shiwu stared at her. And in that moment, something shifted between them. Something that had been building for months. hidden beneath professional distance and survival instincts and the weight of impossible circumstances. "You're extraordinary," he said softly. "You know that?" Gabriella's breath caught. Don't what? Don't talk like that. Don't," she looked away. "Don't make this harder than it already is." "I'm not trying to make anything hard. I'm stating a fact." His voice was gentle. "You walked into hell and chose to see a human being instead of a monster. That's rare. Stop." But he didn't. "I've known presidents and criminals, Gabriella. People with power that could move nations. And not one of them had half your courage." "Courage?" She laughed, but it came out broken. "I'm terrified. Every day. Every time I walk through those doors. Every time I lie in my translations. Every time She stopped. Couldn't finish. "Every time you what?" Gabriella met his eyes. "Every time I realize I'm not doing this just because it's right anymore." The air between them went still. "Then why?" Kong Shiwu asked quietly. She should have lied. Should have deflected. Should have protected herself. Instead, she told the truth. "Because I can't stand the thought of you disappearing. Of you becoming just another lie they tell. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Of losing you." Kong Shiwu closed his eyes. "Gabriella. I know it's impossible. I know it's forbidden. I know you're the only person I've spoken to in 6 months who sees me as something other than a problem to be solved." He opened his eyes. They were bright with something that looked almost like tears. "And I know that if circumstances were different, if I were different, you'd what? I'd do everything in my power to keep you safe. To keep you close. To..." He stopped himself. Shook his head. "But circumstances aren't different. I'm a dead man in everything but execution date. And you deserve so much more than a ghost. What if I don't want more?" Gabriella's voice cracked. "What if I just want this? These stolen minutes. These conversations. This, whatever this is. This is dangerous. I don't care." "You should." "Well, I don't." She was crying now, and she didn't care about that either. "I don't care that it's forbidden. I don't care that it's impossible. I don't care that loving you is the stupidest thing I've ever done." The word hung between them. Loving. She'd said it. Out loud. In a room with cameras and microphones and guards right outside. Kong Shiwu's face transformed. Every wall, every defense, every carefully maintained distance gone. Just for a second. Just long enough for her to see the man beneath the composure. "Gabriella," he breathed. And then the door opened. The guards were back. Session over. Gabriella stood on shaking legs. Gathered her notes. Didn't look at him because if she did, she'd break completely. As she reached the door, Kong Shiwu spoke. In Korean. Loud enough for the guards to hear. "Thank you for your service, interpreter." But in the dialect, so quietly only she would understand, he added. "I don't deserve you. But I'm grateful for you. Every day." She walked out. Managed to make it to the parking lot. Got into her car. And then she broke. If this story is breaking your heart, let me know in the comments. Also, do not forget to like and subscribe, as this would mean a lot for our small channel. 3 days passed before they let her see him again. 3 days of silence from the facility. 3 days of Gabriella checking her phone obsessively, wondering if they'd discovered what she'd said. Wondering if they'd reviewed the footage. Wondering if she'd just signed both their death warrants with a single word. Loving. She'd said it in a room designed to catch confessions. And she couldn't bring herself to regret it. When the call finally came, it was the same gray-suited woman. The same cold voice. "Ms. Okonkwo, your presence is requested. Not required. Requested." The subtle shift in language made Gabriella's stomach drop. They knew. But when she arrived at the facility, nothing seemed different. Same security protocols. Same guards. Same descent into the underground levels that always made her feel like she was being swallowed. The interrogation room was empty when she entered. Just her. No Kong Shiwu. No guards. Just a table, 2 chairs, and a camera blinking red in the corner. She sat down and waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then the door opened, and it wasn't Kong Shiwu. It was the woman in gray. Ms. Okonkwo. She sat down across from Gabriella with a folder in her hands. We need to discuss your performance. My performance? Your translations have been thorough, detailed. The committee appreciates your professionalism. Thank you. However, the woman opened the folder. Inside were printouts of Gabriella's session reports. We've noticed some inconsistencies. Gabriella's heart hammered. What kind of inconsistencies? Discrepancies between your verbal translations during sessions and your written reports afterward. Small things. Word choices. Emphasis. The woman's eyes were sharp. It's almost as if you're editing. I provide context, Gabriella said carefully. Dialect translation isn't always literal. Cultural nuances. We're aware. The woman smiled. Which is why we're not concerned. Yet? The word yet hung in the air like a blade. However, the woman continued, we do want to remind you of the terms of your contract. You are to translate objectively. Without bias. Without, she paused meaningfully. Personal investment. Gabriella forced herself to meet the woman's gaze. I understand. Do you? The woman leaned forward. Because Subject 19 is a security threat, Ms. Okonkwo. He's manipulative. Charismatic. He's spent his entire life reading people, using them, controlling them. It's how he built his organization. It's how he operated for 20 years without being caught. He hasn't manipulated me. Hasn't he? The woman tilted her head. You came here as a neutral contractor. 8 weeks later, you're requesting additional sessions. Spending extra time reviewing recordings. Taking notes that go beyond your scope of work. She tapped the folder. That sounds like investment to me. I'm being thorough. Or you're being influenced. Gabriella's hands clenched beneath the table. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm reminding you of reality. The woman stood. Subject 19 will be executed within 6 months. This is not a question of if. It's a question of when. And nothing you do, no amount of thorough translations, no amount of personal investment will change that outcome. She walked to the door. Paused with her hand on the handle. One more thing, Ms. Okonkwo. We've been reviewing footage from your sessions. All of it. Including audio. The woman glanced back. Be careful what you say. And be more careful what you feel. Emotions are weaknesses in a place like this. And weaknesses get exploited. Then she left. Gabriella sat alone in the room for another 10 minutes, trying to calm her racing pulse. They knew. Maybe not everything. But enough. Enough to warn her. Enough to remind her that she was being watched. Enough to make sure she understood. Kang Shi-woo was already dead. The only question was whether she'd die with him. When they finally brought him in, Kang Shi-woo looked at her and immediately knew something was wrong. The guards positioned him in his chair. Locked the restraints. Left the room. The moment the door closed, he spoke. What happened? They know. Gabriella's voice was flat. Not everything. But enough. About the notes? About, she swallowed. About me. About how I feel. Kang Shi-woo's expression darkened. What did they say? That you're manipulating me. That I'm compromised. That nothing I do will change your execution date. She laughed bitterly. They wanted to remind me of my place. And what is your place? Translator. Contractor. Nobody. No. His voice was fierce. You're the only person in this building with a conscience. Don't let them take that from you. They already are. Gabriella looked at him, really looked at him. At the man who'd been condemned for refusing to murder. At the man who spoke of death like an old friend. At the man she'd somehow, impossibly, fallen in love with. They're going to kill you, Shi-woo. And I can't stop it. It was the first time she'd used his name. Not Subject 19. Not the prisoner. Shi-woo. He closed his eyes like she'd struck him. Don't, he said quietly. Don't what? Don't say my name like that. Like he stopped. Opened his eyes. Like I'm someone worth saving. You are. I'm not. His voice was raw. I've killed people, Gabriella. Not in self-defense. Not by accident. I gave orders that ended lives because it was convenient for business. Because it eliminated competition. Because he looked away. Because I told myself the ends justified the means. That's not the same as what they wanted you to do. Isn't it? Kang Shi-woo's jaw clenched. I drew a line at political assassination, at murdering a journalist for exposing corruption. But where was that line when I ordered a rival's warehouse burned? When I had evidence destroyed? When I... Stop. Gabriella's voice cut through his confession. You're not the same man who did those things. How do you know? Because that man wouldn't care about a translator's survival. Wouldn't warn her away. Wouldn't. Her voice broke. Wouldn't look at me the way you do. The silence stretched between them. Finally, Kong Shi spoke. How do I look at you? Like I matter. You do. Why? He smiled, sad and tired and completely honest. Because you're the first person in 20 years who's seen me as human. Not a resource. Not a threat. Not a means to an end. He paused. Just human. Flawed and failing and worthy of love. Gabriella finished. Kong Shi's composure cracked completely. Don't. Why not? Because I can't, his voice broke. Because I'm going to die, Gabriella. And if you love me, it's just going to hurt more when I'm gone. It already hurts. She was crying again. It's been hurting since the day I walked into this room. Since you asked if I'd survive knowing the truth. Since you, she wiped her eyes roughly. Since you made me care. I never meant to. I know. But here we are. Kong Shi stared at her. And then, in a voice so quiet she almost missed it, I don't want to love you. Gabriella's breath stopped. Neither do I, she whispered. But here we are. The admission hung between them raw and real and utterly forbidden. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. They just sat in that concrete room with its cameras and its cold air and its walls that had witnessed so many confessions and let the truth exist between them. Then King Shi did something he'd never done before. He smiled. Not sadly. Not bitterly. With something that looked almost like peace. If circumstances were different, he said quietly, I would court you properly. Take you to dinner. Learn everything about you. Make you laugh until you forgot about all this darkness. If circumstances were different, Gabriella replied, I'd let you. We could have had something beautiful. We already do. She reached across the table carefully, slowly, giving him time to pull away. It's just not the kind of beautiful anyone writes stories about. Her hand stopped inches from his. Close enough to feel the heat of his skin. Close enough that if either of them moved just slightly, they'd touch. It would be the first time. Kong Shi looked at her hand. Then at her face. If we do this, if I touch you, there's no going back. You understand that? I crossed that line weeks ago. Gabriella. I know the risks. I know the consequences. I know, her voice steadied. I know this might be the only time we get. So please, let me have this. For a heartbeat, Kong Shi hesitated. Then he moved his hand forward. And their fingers touched. It was the smallest contact. The briefest connection. Just fingertips brushing in a room designed for confessions and condemnations. But it felt like the world shifting on its axis. Gabriella's breath caught. Kong Shi's eyes closed. And for just a moment, one stolen, impossible moment, they weren't prisoner and translator. They weren't condemned and complicit. They were just two people who'd found something real in the most unreal place imaginable. Then the door opened. The guards returned. And they pulled their hands apart. Saving him would make her a criminal. Letting him die would make her complicit. That night, Gabriella made her decision. She was going to leak the truth. Not to the media, they were too controlled. Not to lawyers, they'd ask questions she couldn't answer. But to someone. Somewhere. Someone who could make noise loud enough that even a black site facility couldn't ignore it. She spent 2 days researching. Found an international human rights organization that specialized in exposing government abuse. They had encrypted channels. Anonymous reporting. Protection for whistleblowers. On the third night, she composed her report. She included everything. Kang Shi's testimony. The altered translations. The lack of legal process. The evidence that he'd been detained not for crimes committed, but for crimes refused. She attached her hidden notes, the real translations, unedited, undoctored. And then she stared at the send button for 20 minutes. This was it. The point of no return. If she did this, she'd be committing treason. breaking her contract, violating every security protocol she'd agreed to. She'd lose her visa, her career, possibly her freedom. But Kang Shirwoo would have a chance. A small one. A slim one. But a chance. She thought about his hands in chains. His voice in the darkness. His question that first day, if I tell the truth, will you survive knowing it? She thought about the way he looked at her, like she was the only real thing in a world of shadows. She thought about love that was forbidden and dangerous and completely impossible. And she pressed send. The response came faster than she expected. 72 hours later, protests erupted outside the Ministry of Justice building. Human rights groups, international observers, journalists demanding answers about Subject 19 and the allegations of extrajudicial detention. The facility went into lockdown. Gabriella was banned from entering. Her contract was suspended pending review. She waited in her apartment, listening to news reports, watching as the story she'd leaked spread across social media like wildfire. Who is Subject 19? What is the government hiding? Why no trial? The pressure was mounting. The silence was cracking. And somewhere beneath the city, Kang Shirwoo was still alive. For now. 2 weeks later, she received a message. Anonymous. Encrypted. Sent through channels she didn't recognize. It contained 3 words. They moved him. Gabriella's blood ran cold. A higher security facility. That's what the woman in gray had said. A place for the final phase. A place where even international pressure wouldn't reach. She tried calling the facility. Her access was revoked. She tried calling the ministry. They refused to confirm or deny any detainee transfers. She tried everything and got nowhere. Kang Shirwoo had disappeared. And she had no way to find him. The execution happened on a Tuesday morning. Gabriella found out from a one-line press release buried on page 7 of a government website. Subject 19, convicted of national security violations, was executed at 6:47 a.m. No further comment. No name. No trial record. No acknowledgement of the protests or the leaked documents or the international outcry. Just gone. Gabriella read the line 17 times before it became real. Then she went to the bathroom and threw up. They killed him to keep the lie alive. But the truth refused to stay buried. 6 months later, an investigative journalist published a comprehensive report. It detailed everything. The Operation Kang Shirwoo had refused. The officials who'd ordered it. The cover-up that followed. The doctored translations and the manipulated evidence and the execution that happened too quickly, too quietly, too conveniently. The journalist had sources. Documents. Testimony. And buried in the footnotes, never named, never identified, was a reference to translated materials provided by an anonymous linguist. Gabriella read the article in a cafe in Lagos. She'd left Korea 3 months earlier. Left her apartment, her career, her entire life behind. She had nothing left but the truth. And a thumb drive on a chain around her neck. The government issued a statement denying all allegations. The officials named in the report remained in their positions. No one was charged. No one was punished. But the protests didn't stop. Students demanding justice. Activists calling for investigations. International pressure that couldn't be ignored forever. And slowly, so slowly, things began to change. New oversight committees. New regulations on black site detentions. New protections for whistleblowers. Small changes. Incremental changes. But changes nonetheless. Kang Shirwoo had been right. The truth couldn't save him. But maybe, just maybe, it could save someone else. 2 years later, Gabriella stood in front of a memorial. It had been erected quietly, without fanfare, in a small park on the outskirts of Seoul. A simple stone with names carved into it, people who'd disappeared in the custody of the state. And there, near the bottom, recently added, Kang Shirwoo, 1986 to 2026. He was never allowed to live free. But because of him, millions were. Gabriella traced the letters with her fingers. She'd submitted the inscription anonymously. Didn't know if they'd use it. But there it was. His name. His truth. His legacy. She stood there for a long time, remembering. his voice in the darkness, his hands almost touching hers. His question that first day, "If I tell the truth, will you survive knowing it?" She'd survived. Barely. Brokenly. But she'd survived. And she'd made sure his truth survived too. "I kept my promise," she whispered to the stone. I remembered. And I made sure others would remember too. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of cherry blossoms from a nearby tree. Gabriella closed her eyes and let herself imagine, just for a moment, a world where circumstances had been different. Where she could have had dinner with him, learned everything about him, made him laugh. Where loving him hadn't been forbidden. Where truth hadn't cost everything. But this was the world they'd been given. And in this world, Kang Sherwoo had chosen truth over survival. Had chosen to save strangers who would never know his name. Had chosen to trust a translator with his story because he believed, despite everything, that someone somewhere would care enough to listen. And she had. She'd listened. She'd remembered. She'd fought. And she'd loved him. It hadn't been enough to save him, but it had been enough to honor him. And in the end, maybe that was all love could ever do. Bear witness. Refuse to forget. Keep the truth alive even when the person who spoke it was gone. Gabriella opened her eyes. The memorial stood silent in the afternoon sun. And somewhere in the city, in boardrooms and government offices and quiet conversations, people were still talking about Subject 19. Still asking questions. Still demanding answers. The lie hadn't won. Not completely. Because Kang Sherwoo had been right about one thing. Truth didn't need permission to exist. It just needed someone willing to remember it. And Gabriella would remember. For the rest of her life. She would remember. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share it. Some stories deserve to be remembered. See you in the next video.